Hey, this is Babalola, a senior psychology major here at Morehouse College, and this is the More Conversation podcast hosted by the Andrew Young Center for Global Leadership. Today I have the amazing honor of speaking with two people. Would you introduce yourself now?
Sure. My name is Kafia Haile. I'm a graduate of Spelman, class of 2002. I work as a foreign policy advisor to a member of the Georgia House of Representatives. I'm also a filmmaker, and I use film and the arts to help people understand foreign policy and what tools they have to change U.S. foreign policy.
Hey, my name is Ahmad Abuznaid. I'm a Palestinian born in Jerusalem. My family is from Al-Khalil and Bura Al-Khalil. I've lived in all of the above as a child. I'm coming to you today as the executive director at the U.S. Campaign for Palestinian Rights. We're a network of organizations, activists all across the U.S. that are dedicated to ending all U.S. military aid to the apartheid state of Israel. So I'm excited for the conversation. Thanks for having me.
Thank you both for introducing yourself. I think right now we'll just jump to the first question. And I just want to understand, what do you guys think the role of understanding the history between the Palestinian-Israeli conflict plays in people having a full viewpoint of full viewpoint of the conflict and understanding how they can help and how they can be more educated?
I can start with that. What I see with a lot of people is they're looking at social media now and seeing images of the genocide that's happening. And they want to get involved, but they're afraid that they don't have information to get involved. And we all know in a genocide, we all need to speak up, but there's just this fear that they have. And they say this phrase, it's complicated. And everyone uses this same phrase like it's been taught to us. And so they feel like they need to learn the history in order to take action now. And so it's important for them to get an accurate historical picture of everything that led up to where we are now in terms of this genocide so that they have the confidence to take action.
Yeah, and I'll just add that, having the history and the key context for any situation is what's going to allow for you to have a proper analysis. If you start reading a book in chapter 8, and it's a 12-chapter book, you're going to be missing a lot of key information that's going to impact your analysis. You're going to actually have a wholly biased perspective. And that's what actually shows up a lot of time across the U.S. is that folks have been really just, informed from the U.S. Israel-centered perspective, which is, of course, the side of the colonizer, the occupier, and at this very moment, the side that is committing an act of genocide.
And what about the history you say is being omitted or misunderstood? What specific points are we not hearing?
Almost everything. Oh, go ahead, Ahmed.
Yeah, I was going to say, so Israel's founded in 1948, but one of the biggest misconceptions is that people assume we're talking about biblical Israel, right? And so there's this notion that you have to support because this is what, the Word of God told us, right? And so when you operate from that sort of framework, you have no idea that, in fact, the British in 1917, again, the British, I want to make it clear, a colonial power that has colonized all across the planet, got a chance to decide what is going to happen, with various pieces of land in the Middle East, North Africa. The British and the French, as a parts of Sykes-Picot, carved up these pieces of land into nation states, right? And the modern nation state is a creation of these colonial powers. This is important to understand. So the British in 1917 had the Balfour Declaration, where they decided to support the establishment of a Jewish state in Palestine, right? In the complete disregard of the native indigenous Palestinian people, which, by the way, important to note, are made up primarily of Muslim, but also a large population of Christian and, of course, Jewish people. And so there was already a presence in the land of Jewish people. There, of course, is a connection for Jewish people to the land. But Zionism and that colonial process got the support of the imperial colonial powers, such as Britain, in order to found these states. So, of course, it's a settler colony. And missing that context is critical as you analyze who are the Palestinian people, who are the Israeli people, where did we come from, how did we get to this land, and what is this true source of conflict? And so, again, if you don't understand that this is a colonial battle, a struggle against colonialism, then you won't understand why Palestinians are resisting and all the different ways we've been resisting.
And let's really focus on like the colonial aspect, like colonization. How do you think the media has like moved away, like hidden the fact that this is there's an issue of colonization where people of Palestine are being colonized, and like they're like there's another situation where that's the situation that's played out multiple times in our history, how it's just playing out again right now in our eyes for us all to see.
Well, I think we don't hear the word colonization being used until recently. Going back to how we're educated about Palestine, when I was in graduate school studying this, we didn't even use the word Palestinians to talk about what was happening. We talked about Israelis and Arabs, and that was it. And we don't get any history until Israel enters the picture. And so that just perpetuates the violence. If we can't say the word Palestinian, then we can't talk accurately about what is happening to the Palestinian people.
And well, even like moving past the media, let's not talk about like our education system in general. How do you think the education system has like failed us in like educating us about like what the colonization, how it's happening over in Palestine, and just other aspects about the Palestinian-Israel conflict and how it's really truly affecting people over there?
Yeah, I'll just say in the education tip briefly, the U.S. is a settler colonial state, right? The U.S. does not teach its true history, whether it's in relationship to the Black experience in this country or the Native American experience. Nor has the U.S. ever made amends for the atrocities it's committed historically, nor is the U.S. ceasing to commit atrocities right now. So actually, like when you really evaluate these parties that are in partnership, the United States and Israel, it's literally like looking at the mirror. And so in one sense, who is the U.S. to be able to, espouse this sort of rhetoric about Israel when the U.S. has done the exact same and continues to do the exact same? But at the same time, many of us in the U.S. are not that history of the U.S. We aren't the colonizers. We weren't the slavers, right? We are folks that are descended from different communities that struggled under these systems. We are folks that immigrated to the U.S. because of U.S. imperialism, right? There's a reason many of us as Arabs and Muslims end up in this country, right? So we reject kind of the vision that the founders of this country had for what this land would be. And I think we have a much more, I think, representative notion that's rooted in justice in this country. So we, of course, demand, and this impacts how our communities are showing up in this moment, supporting Palestine. That's why when you see our rallies and our massive demonstrations, it's a diverse coalition. And that's what scares the powers that be. And that's why it's a really powerful moment to be a part of this movement. I'd love for, Kafia to jump in. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Sure. In academia, there's a lot of pressure that's put on professors not to be able to speak accurately about what's happening. A lot of them get targeted, sometimes threatened with losing their jobs. They're portrayed as being anti-Semitic for accurately describing what's happening in Palestine and what's happening historically. And one of the questions you asked earlier is about how to get more information. One of the things that I had to do after graduate school was going on social media and seeing what Palestinians were talking about and reaching out to people like Ahmad and his organization to attend teach-ins to get more information. So the same thing that we've experienced in the Black community where we know what's happening to us is not accurately portrayed in the media. And so we have our own sources of news that provide us with accurate information. We have to do that same thing. For some people, they might look at social media as not being effective, but it really is. It's a very strong way for marginalized people to be able to get out accurate information of what they're experiencing.
And I really like the fact that you like harp on the fact that this is something that also happens in the Black community, or like we're not the accurate picture of what's actually happening in the cities, or like what's actually happening to our people isn't being told. And so I think that's really important. Really harping on this so that people, so a lot of college understand, like a lot of people of color understand that this is an issue that isn't just across the world, isn't just like across the sea. It's an issue that has lots of what's happened to us right here, and the fact that our story isn't being told. And so same way the Palestinian voice is being silenced, Black voice is being silenced, that we have to like understand and support our brothers. And like how Ahmad said, like the coalition is a multitude of people. It's not just Palestinians. It's not just Arab people. It's Black people. It's white people. It's even some Jewish people who understand that their history has been properly said, and that we're not telling the full truth. And what is it? I want to also move on to our next question, talking about more the U.S. And I want to understand, was our people to understand how does U.S. foreign policy, how's UN foreign policy affected or like influenced by the Palestinian-Israeli conflict? And what are some decisions that U.S. foreign policy makes based on this conflict?
Well, I think, again, going back to the United States and understanding U.S. imperialism, the settler colonial state of Israel functions as an arm of U.S. imperialism. So the function is to have a imperialist nation state in the sea of the Arab North African world. And so that dictates how the U.S. has shown up in support of Israel and the positions it's taken across the region, right? The U.S. has not been an honest broker. The U.S. is tasked with being this honest broker to bring Palestinians and Israelis together for peace. But you can't be a mediator if you actually work in full support of one side, which is what we see, right? The U.S. right now funds Israel to the tune of a minimum of $4 billion annually in military aid, right? And the Israelis use it for whatever they want on the U.S. side, right? And this arms their occupation, this arms their genocide actively. So when we talk about U.S. foreign policy and how it shows up, it's not just diplomatic statements and rosy press conferences or stopping our Security Council resolutions at the UN. It's actively arming and supporting the genocide of Palestinians. And I'd like to just make a note about the dangers of genocide here for us domestically, not just abroad. So yes, first and foremost, nearly 20,000 Palestinians, if not more, already have been killed in this latest round of vicious genocidal assaults on Gaza. This is important to note, at least 7,000 children, right? But if we were just for a moment to consider also domestically how this has impacted us. 6-year-old Wadi' al-Fayoumi in Illinois was stabbed to death. His mother was stabbed and then recovered in the hospital. 3 Palestinian students in Vermont, of all places, were shot the other day. One of them, Hisham, is likely to be paralyzed for life. My organization, the U.S. campaign, has had death threats. There is, in fact, was an arrest by the FBI of an individual who was issuing death threats to our staff. Our conference was canceled, and many other conferences have been canceled because of violent threats issued to these hotels and businesses in relationship to hosting our convenings. So there's actually a full-out assault when you consider also the attacks on the student movements. You know, the people fired from jobs, the people who've lost jobs and job opportunities. These attacks are meant to stifle the debate, to stifle the conversation. We can't let that define our pathway. And it's interesting, this is the Andrew Young Center, because Andrew Young himself was also punished and forced to resign from his UN post because he had a meeting with the Palestinians. We will not be deterred, and we'll keep building power until justice and freedom is won.
Logging the fact, but you talking about fear, like the way education, academia, like a lot of fear mongering in that sense where people are afraid to talk about like what's actually happening. Anyways, any advice or major ways that for students to educate themselves so maybe like they can like get past that barrier of fear, so they don't have to like maybe push their teachers or educators in places where like they feel comfortable losing their jobs or losing like, their well-being.
Sure. Virtual teachings are a really effective tool, and you'll see that if you follow like Ahmad's organization. It has a lot of different tools online. Palestinian Youth Movement. There's lots of groups even here in Georgia that are working constantly to educate people in person and virtually. In terms of the fear of losing your job, one of the most important things for people to do right now is calling their representatives for a ceasefire. That's something that will not result in you losing your job. There aren't anybody, no one's like a staff or an intern is going to spread that information that you're calling for a ceasefire. So you're safe in doing that, and it's the most important thing that you can do. The other thing that I will recommend for everyone is face your fear. I understand that fear, but we're students. We came out of Spelman and Morehouse in this history and legacy of a student movement where we come from people that met their fears. We wouldn't be here if our ancestors had not faced their fears. And I initially had fears of speaking up, like would people consider me anti-Semitic, potential of lost job opportunities. And every fear that I faced, that fear is behind me now. Every time that you see something that you're afraid of, just keep going past that, and you're going to find out that fear winds up going away. And especially right now in this moment, like there was the huge march in D.C., over 300,000 people. Ahmad's organization was one of the co-sponsors. That was such a powerful feeling, and I have not experienced a feeling like that in this country before in terms of support for Palestine. There are more of us that are choosing love and believe in love and freedom. So remember that you are actually not alone, that there's more people who are with you.
Yeah, I mean, can you speak about how like operating around fear and making sure that fear doesn't stifle like your work, and like just being stronger than the fear, stronger than the threats being thrown at you and your people?
I really think, sometimes we make more of it than it is. The reality is Palestinian people have responded like that, and Black folks have responded like that, and Native folks have responded like that, because that's the situation we've been put in, right? The Palestinian people for 75 plus years now have been fighting for our survival, fighting for our existence, for our land, for our olive trees, for our traditions, for our families. And that's just the situation we've been put in. And so it's actually the absolute most human. It is the most human nature based response there could be, to fight back, to resist, to reject notions that we are lesser than, to reject notions that we don't deserve, to reject notions that are defining us and boxing us in. No, we define ourselves. We are self-determined. We will tell the world who the Palestinian people are, what our borders are, what our culture and values are. And we've been speaking to that every day of our lives. That's what you'll find out if you join an organizing body with some Palestinian folks, if you join an organization, you come to a protest. And, as Kafia said, it's a beautiful moment to be surrounded by community and love. And I really do believe that we will win.
I wanted to touch really briefly on the spiritual component of this, because this is a school where a lot of the leaders that come out of here are ministers, but we don't talk about spirituality enough in terms of the work that we do. And one of the things that I always keep in mind is we have to, if you are a spiritual person, you're thinking about, you have to go to God and account for what you did while you were here. And how much sense is it going to make that you saw people suffering and were too nervous about a job so you didn't step in, when we know that's what our spiritual teachings tell us that we have to do. So right now, especially now as college students, before you're out making a ton of money and get hooked on that money, start thinking about what your spiritual beliefs are and what that dictates about what your actions must be.
Of course. I also just want to bring like other small things up. Not even, I wouldn't say small, because I feel like even any action like to support Palestine, like and fight against what's happening over there is a big action. But on Spelman's campus they have a Starbucks. I know the boycotting against Starbucks has been a big thing. Any comments about that, and like how like even boycotts and like stuff like that is also supportive and helpful for the situation?
Yeah, I mean, the boycott movement is something that the Palestinian people, have been building for decades, and we took a lot of inspiration from, the Montgomery bus boycotts and Southern boycotts. We took a lot of inspiration, of course, from the boycott of South African apartheid. And so I do want to mention BDS, the Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions Movement. And I would recommend highly looking at their resources, because they're super intentional with the direction they recommend folks boycott. So of course, there's this boycott of Starbucks, which has proven, definitely impactful to the bottom line from what I've seen, and is certainly, something folks should continue to do. But there's also other boycott targets, and I think each locale should be able to decide and determine, what their boycott target is. It should make sense as a intersectional approach, right? Because there are also corporations that are actively involved in oppression of Black folks, Native folks, other folks across the globe, in Africa, the Congo, etc. So I think the powerful, one of the many powerful things about these boycotts is they can also be intersectional. So I definitely recommend checking out the BDS movement and other recommended targets as well.
I want to talk about the impact of our Black politicians who support Israel on the boycott movement. And I'm going to talk very specifically about one of our Morehouse brothers, Senator Reverend Raphael Warnock, who is the minister of Martin Luther King's church, Ebenezer Baptist Church, who no longer supports boycotts that would support Palestinian people. Now that once he ran for office, that was his position. Governor Wes Moore of Maryland came and spoke at Morehouse's graduation last year, said he does not support boycotts. Boycotts are a part of our history and culture as Black folks, because that is how we won our rights. And so you have people coming to this school where Martin Luther King worked on all these boycotts, and they are disrespecting his legacy by telling us that we shouldn't boycott. So my recommendation to you all is not only to boycott, but when we have politicians that come to this campus, even if it's somebody with the same skin as us, challenge them on that issue, on how are you standing on the legacy of these civil rights leaders, but telling us that we should not follow in their footsteps and fighting with the Palestinian people through a nonviolent means such as boycotts.
Exactly. And just one final question. Again, I just want to pull back to the history thing. Again, just any specific things that you think that the people of AUC, people of this world need to understand about the history about the Palestine-Israel conflict, and so they can fully have a full grasp of what's happening and understand how they can affect and support Palestine in this time.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's so much that's important that I want to recommend, but I'll just mention one book and then a couple of accounts or organizations. The book that I think could be most comprehensive and helpful is The 100-Year War on Palestine by Professor Rashid Khalidi. It's giving you 100 years of context that informs how you should be able to arrive at the proper analysis for the settler colonial state of Israel and the Palestinian people's response to Zionism, that settler colonial state. I also have to shout out the U.S. Campaign for Palestinian Rights, because you mentioned, in addition to understanding, what can you do? And right now we're driving hundreds of thousands of calls and letters to members of Congress to demand an immediate ceasefire, an end to the siege, an end to U.S. military support to the state of Israel. And of course, there's protests, there's direct actions. There's so many ways you can get involved, op-eds, right? Shifting the narrative. So there's so many ways that you can get involved. And I'm sure Kafia has some ideas too. U.S. Campaign for Palestinian Rights. I'll also mention IMEU, because they are a Palestinian communications outfit in the U.S. So, they're going to help you understand the situation on the ground. They have really great graphics on their social medias. And they're actively getting Palestinian voices involved in media. So I want to make sure I mention them as well. Oh, I'm sorry. One more. Palestine Legal is another one. In case folks are seeing repression and facing repression, I want to mention Palestine Legal and the ADC for legal support for students or activists. Thank you.
And my recommendation is to make sure that as you're reading and learning, that you're still taking action. So I always think about what Black folks went through in 2020, seeing our people being killed, and people who call themselves allies would ask for book recommendations and order books about our history, and that would be the end of the conversation. So yes, we have a lot to learn, but there are things that we can do right now as we're learning. So things like BDS, but also calling your representatives. And there are things you can do on campus, everybody get together and call their reps together. If that's something that you want to do, there are people doing that together online all the time. Dream Defenders does that, a power hour. I think Ahmad knows about that, the power hour, where everybody can call their reps virtually. But that just make sure that you're taking action and not spending so much time in books that we're watching a genocide and learning about it and not doing something at the same time.
Thank you both again for coming out and talking. This is Babalola, a senior psychology major from Morehouse College, and this has been More Conversations Podcast.